Hello and welcome to Ink vs. Algorithm, the Writers Podcast. I'm your host, Mookie Spitz, and I've got Matthew Nelson in the pod today. Welcome aboard, Matthew.
Hey, great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
You are a doctorate in theology and literature, and Mike Robinson, the world-famous LA writer, introduced us. He goes, Mookie, I read your science fiction and fantasy book, and it reminds me of Thomas Pynchon, which I thought was flattering. And he goes,
Yeah.
I got a Pynchon guy for you, Nelson. He's a huge fan. And the way Mike put it is, you got a PhD in Thomas Pynchon. So I thought that was pretty cool. And he connected us. So thank you, Mike Robinson. Check us out. We did a separate podcast with Mike. And now I got you, Matthew, and I can't wait to do some Thomas Pynchon inside sports with you.
Yes, sir. Same here. Same here. It's good to be with a fellow Pynchonian.
A Pynchonian, a Pynchoner.
Yeah. Pynchonite, there's got to be some variation. We're talking about Pynchon here. There's a multiplicity at every moment, every bend and curve.
And we can throw in some meta puns and some goofy names, and we can go full meta with this. But before we dive in, tell our viewers and listeners a little bit about yourself. I find your dual doctorate interesting in both literature and theology, and the theological component is fascinating given the worlds that Thomas Pynchon creates. There's a lot of commentary about religion and its relationship to belief and science and boundary. So this will be juicy. Tell us a little bit about yourself first, Matt.
Absolutely. So, I guess the short story about my doctorate is I graduated from the University of St. Andrews. It's in Scotland. And there is an institute called the Institute for Theology, Imagination, and the Arts. So it's all about this relationship of those three. And I got accepted to write a whole thesis on the work of Thomas Pynchon and his curious engagement with religion, with just his it's wild. I mean, he's even dived even just a little bit of Pynchon. It's wild stuff, and there's so much there. But I did work a few years ago in that, and I'm a writer myself, or I try to be, of fiction as well. We could start there, I guess, but yeah, I'm a Pynchonian who's done some work at this intersection of theology and literature.
And what was the thesis of your thesis? What was the point you were trying to demonstrate or prove related to theology and Mr. Pynchon?
Yeah, I would say basically it is. So it's a reading of Pynchon's body of work. I cover most of it. I couldn't quite get to every single novel, but it covers Pynchon's body of work, and it reads it in relation to the Gothic tradition, and specifically, though, the American Gothic, which is it's a very fluid kind of term, but I read it in relation to American Gothic in order to show more precisely and more expansively how Pynchon engages with the religious, the mythic, secularization processes in modernity, and these kind of big, this kind of stuff. And that's kind of the innovation is, Pynchon is sometimes read. He's read here and there in relation to the Gothic, but more often it's the postmodern is kind of the theoretical kind of designation, but the American Gothic is the particular kind of angle I have on it.
Knowing his oeuvre, I'm assuming you probably dove deep into Mason Dixon and Gravity's Rainbow. Those two seem to capture that American Gothic theme in a very vivid way and against the day as well. And we can dive into all these books when we go inside sports, inside Pynchon. But I could see where the Venn diagram comes together pretty seamlessly in terms of what would be considered the American Gothic. Pynchon is an old school WASP. Apparently, his ancestry was traced to not the Nina, but maybe the Pinta, I think. Wasn't it the second ship of the three? Apparently, there was a Pynchon who was a cook on the Pinta or the Santa Maria. Isn't that right?
I believe that's correct. Yeah, and the big incredible kind of foundationally American thing about, or foundational thing about his family is, as you know, I think William Pynchon, his ancestor, in I think it's 1650, he wrote this theological work that was the first banned book in America, or at least that's its claim to fame. The Meritorious Price of Our Redemption.
He was an early heretic.
Yes.
By the stretch within that Puritan tradition, and reading it now, it seems to be so tied into the orthodoxy, but it deviated enough to trigger enough people and jump a few generations, and we've got Thomas triggering a whole bunch of other people, many of whom are theologians. So I think the connection is interesting. Pynchon paradizes his own family. Shit, money, and the word is the legacy of Tyrone Slothrop, and that's a thinly veiled commentary on the Pynchon family, going from boom to bust, some old school money, but not that much, and basically being wired in spite of themselves and probably to spite themselves into the American ethos. And he was very, very sensitive to that. And it erupts in a lot of his work, especially his better works, especially in Gravity's Rainbow and Mason Dixon.
Absolutely. You're on it, man. You're on it.
I'm a Pynchon nerd. By way of personal apocryphal stories, I lived on New York's Upper West Side for a couple, 3 years. I lived in Manhattan and its surroundings for about 13 years. I recently moved to Orange County from New York. And the bleeding edge takes place on the Upper West Side. And apparently Pynchon himself lives there and has lived there for quite some time. So I wonder if there might have been an older gentleman that I happened to cross while going from Broadway to Amsterdam, where I live, by 98th Street, and wow, who knows, right?
If there's some omniscient or some way of finding out one day, maybe you have crossed paths with the man himself. Yeah,
with the man himself, we shared oxygen atoms at that intersection, or maybe we ate in the same diner at the same time. You just never know. So these brushes with literary fame. And as far as him being seen or known, the reason that I would not know is because he's one of the most secretive writers. He doesn't like cameras, zero paparazzi, zero interviews. He appeared in 2004 on 2 Simpson episodes where he was drawn with a paper bag on his head. And apparently the voiceover is him. And he makes jokes about cameras and Marge's books and being that reclusive author. So there's a little meta humor even in his 2 appearances on The Simpsons. And Paul Thomas Anderson, the director, actually made a movie of Inherent Vice, and we can talk about that. And the recent battle, One Battle After Another with Leo DiCaprio is apparently loosely based on Vinland.
That's right.
So you've got these cultural cross references. Thomas Pynchon is not a household name yet. He has infused himself within our culture in subtle ways, sometimes even bombastic ways where the connections aren't overt. But he's been influential. And in terms of what we would consider postmodern literature, he's an absolute titan. He is a goat. So whether you love him or hate him, whether you get it or you don't, Thomas Pynchon is iconic. Born in 1937, I believe, makes him 88 years old now. And he grew up in Long Island, I think. He was in the Navy. His first book popped when he was young, 2627V, and it instantly put him on the map. And in my humble, bald-headed opinion, Gravity's Rainbow immortalized that guy. That is a work of transcendent genius. We can talk more about it. But I consider him the man. I've got issues with some of his stuff. He's an idol, but I have my own love-hate kind of relationship with my own perceptions of him and my own readings of him. But I put him as one of my favorites, and really, Gravity's Rainbow is one of my, without a doubt, top 3 books. If we can blast a few novels out there into the void, Gravity's Rainbow has got to go out there.
Absolutely.
Testament to human civilization. So that's my shtick. I got into Pynchon when I was young, and I'm kind of, as Thomas himself would refer to me, I'm an old veteran hoofer.
Yes.
To use the term from Gravity's Rainbow. I was about 21, 22 when I read Gravity's Rainbow. I first came across it. That was 1986. So it was about 13 years after the thing was written. He was still hot. And it was prior to much of anything coming out afterwards. So we had to wait quite some time, I believe, for Vinland after that.
That must have been, yeah. That must have just been so incredible to, to have this legendary, these legendary first 3 novels, like V, Crying a Lot 49, and Gravity's Rainbow. And then for 17 years, it was just, there's nothing, except for maybe a couple of articles and, introduction to a couple of things.
Liner notes to the band Lotion. I don't know if you've seen those, right? He used to be a Lotion fan. So just popping up here and there and kind of doing his thing, and stewing on Mason Dixon, which we need to talk about also. I put Gravity's Rainbow and Mason Dixon as the big ones. But that's my first blush. That's how I popped my Thomas Pynchon cherry. At the time, I was 22, and it was like literally like a needle in the vein, a big bump of methamphetamine for me in terms of just the dopamine burst. There's only a handful of artistic experiences that literally shook the foundation of how I looked at the world, how I considered art. Star Wars, when I was 13, 1977, seeing that on the big screen for the first time was one of them. And reading Gravity's Rainbow is in that short list of jaw-dropping, mind-blowing, wow, I didn't even know you could do this stuff kind of experiences. It's the textual version of Van Halen 1. It's like, boom, nothing the same after these things are released to the world. How about you? What's interesting about our conversation is it's cross-generational. I'm tacitly assuming you're at least 5-10 years younger than I am. And you're of a different generation. So your exposure to Pynchon is very, very different from mine. The culture in which you were raised and grew up and experienced it. So I'm fascinating to hear about your first blush with the man, with the works, and why you think it's stuck to the point where you dedicated your PhD work to him.
Yeah, good. It's good questions. First off, yeah, it's great to hear where you're coming from with this, and I would love to get into that. There's so much you've already alluded to. We'll definitely have to get into. But for me, so I started reading classic literature. So I grew up on Stephen King and horror stuff, horror movies, horror literature, and in my undergrad, I was a philosophy major, and And I started, I wanted to be a writer, and I'm starting to read stuff like Dostoevsky, and I'm getting into, Melville, and starting the journey, just starting the journey of these classic works. And it was when I moved to Los Angeles, of course. Of course, there had to be a LA move. That was when I was trying to be a screenwriter, and I was trying to, and also trying to still work on this novel, this eternal novel I've been writing. And I finally got to Thomas Pynchon in my reading, and I read Inherent Vice was my first one, and I just found it so funny, first off, just hilarious. It's a hippie, they call it a hippie noir. This a private detective in 1970. Yeah.
Doc Sportello,
Doc
right?
Sportello, yes, played by Joaquin Phoenix, of course, in the film adaptation. And man, I thought that it captured something about the strange paranoia of the post 9/11 world, actually, because I'm 39, so I was 14 years old when 9/11 happened. I was, I guess it was about 4 years later, YouTube came onto the scene, and so my world is very hypermediated, and there's so much strange, like, attempts of people to get at the truth, to get to the bottom of things. And there's this spiraling of, or maybe a revival of, uh, paranoia, conspiracy theory, this kind of stuff. And I found just the form of the detective, that Pynchon's take on the detective story in Inherent Vice, it just rang so true in this funny way. It captured the absurdity of our times, and also, okay, so anyway, without going on and on, it grabbed me, and that began my journey ever deeper into Pynchon land. And I went through from there to the first kind of Pynchon detective story, The Crying a Lot 49, which is, of course, his short second novel or novella, depending on who you ask, or long short story, according to Thomas Pynchon himself.
And apparently fulfilling a contractual obligation, because he promised that if they put out V, he owed another novel. And
Yep.
and apparently he was working on Gravity's Rainbow in parallel, and he just needed to get something out, so he pushed Crying of Lot out the door. What's interesting about it, though, it's a female protagonist, Oedipus Moss, right? And we can talk about his choice of protagonists and the archetypes he uses, but that is another detective story. It's also embroiled in a conspiracy within a conspiracy. It brings up the nature of truth, and in ways, Pynchon was way ahead of the curve in terms of conspiracy theories, paranoia, distrust of the government and the system. And it borne itself out, especially to your point, when digital media and social media made the promulgation of misinformation pretty much the norm. This was all prior to that, when he wrote Crying, and around Inherent Vice's time was right at the cusp, right? And he tapped into it early on. He got it.
Absolutely. And it was and I just, even though, of course, Inherent Vice it's a lesser novel in Pynchon's body of work, the the depth of understanding of that mediated culture we're in, even though it's about, it's set in 1970, but it feels so prescient. I mean, he's writing in a kind of anachronistic, he's playing with certain, um the way in which that moment was a seed of later kind of transformations in our mediated world. And anyway, I just found it rang so true.
He loves that kind of anachronism, right? And Mason Dixon is a classic of that, where it's written in that century style with capitalized proper nouns, super long M dashes, super long M dash with a comma,
Yes.
right? And really long, complex sentences, very much in that style, and yet it's thoroughly contemporary. And Inherent Vice, to your point, does the same thing. So it happens in the 70s. You got Doc Sportello smoking weed and stumbling like Columbo through this mystery within a mystery. And yet it's very contemporary. It's anachronistic deliberately in that playful way.
Yes. Yes. It almost, so one could read all of Pynchon's body of work as detective fiction. Like there's a way to look at it. V is, you could say it's about this, at least Stencil. There's this character named Stencil, and he's tracking down the mystery of this woman, or it might be a woman, it might be a thing, it might be the void itself.
Yeah, it's the ultimate MacGuffin, V.
Yes, it's somehow at the heart of the horror of the 20th century, and what happened in the 20th century, or how did we get here? And it's anyway, you can read that as a detective story. Lot 49, of course, is as very much playing with the original detective story was Oedipus, the Oedipus Rex, right?
Yeah.
Who Oedipa is named after, who's
Right.
solving this mystery. And then Gravity's Rainbow, Slothrop is compared to a detective, and he's looking for the rocket, this kind of heart, the dark heart of.
Extension of his own penis, basically. So his erections anticipate the landing of the V2 rocket during the Blitz.
Yes, most importantly, we must.
How's that for the theme of a novel? I used to be reading that book and people, hey, Mookie, what's that book about? And I used to say, well, you got this guy stationed in England during the Blitz and his boners know where the rocket's gonna land. And they're like, right on, dude.
Yep. Deep into that again, that strange interaction with America's Puritan, or its Puritan beginnings, one could say, with the this idea. Pynchon has this interaction with the idea of providence, right through the through Slothrop's erections.
And the boundary between the elect and the preterite. And that's a theme that we can discuss too. So in addition to each of his stories being a detective tale, essentially, he's obsessed with particular themes, one of which is boundary, the delineation between the animate and the inanimate. That's all over V. And then in Gravity's Rainbow, you've got the elect and the preterite. You've got white and black. You have a big racial component and racial theme in Gravity's Rainbow.
Mm-hmm. The rocket, yeah, male and female. The rocket is both a phallus and a womb. Strangely enough, yeah.
Yeah. And then Mason Dixon is literally and figuratively a book about lines and boundaries and demarcating land and people and ideas, recurring themes. That's the one thing of many that I love about him so much, is that he's got these recurring obsessive and recursive themes that he never lets go. And once you read one book from him, you start to speak his language. You understand his lexicon and his worldview. And what's wonderful about it is, regardless which book you pick up, the themes keep resonating. Thermodynamics as influencing even culture and feeding into conspiracy theories.
Yes.
This line between the living and the dead, between the truth and falsehood, what can be known and what can't be known. And then overarching everything is the system, the bureaucracy, echoing William S. Burroughs, his contemporary. Naked Lunch, Pynchon read it and lived that book, because it's almost like Pynchon took vignettes from Burroughs' masterpiece and blew them into entire chapters and novels and exposition.
And there's, so it's the system, but also the zone, or like there's the interplay between what is determined and controlled, and these forces that seem to be setting the parameters of our lives and walling us in. And yet at the same time, Pynchon continues to imagine the possibility of spaces of freedom and spaces in which, there are communities that find alternate ways of living, or that try to sometimes often unsuccessfully, to live outside the system, or to find ways of being not fully subject, at least spiritually, one could say, within this, these dominating forces. Yeah.
The counterforce that's literal in Gravity's Rainbow. And then you have that as one of his many recurring themes too, that action, reaction, the Hegelian thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And for Pynchon, the synthesis is rebellion. But the challenge is that the rebellion takes place within a deterministic mathematical universe. So even that is restricted and frustrated and subject to the same whims and even narcissism of what precipitated it. So there's a circularity to his storytelling, and some people get frustrated that there's a lack of real resolution. He just likes to set up the soapbox, and he'll break the narrative, and he'll start explaining and talking and preaching and letting you know exactly how he feels about what's going on in this world that he's created. And then he'll seamlessly go right back into the narrative. So he violates some of the time-tested and now obsessive rules about show, don't tell. Thomas Pynchon loves to tell you what's going on, and he loves to narrate his own worlds for you. So I think that that's cool. If you're into it, you love it. If you find it obtrusive and annoying, then you don't like it. But he's annotating, in a sense, in a meta way, his own stories and novels. He's his own critic. And he uses that as a very useful and fun device. And that's another thing I love about him, which is it's like, what rules are you talking about? I'm using novels and my writing and literature as a way to pontificate and share my worldview. And yes, it's political. And yes, it's something that I want to tell the world should or could be.
Yeah, totally.
We're blowing smoke up Tom's ass for the last half hour. I'd love to get your take on the things about Thomas that annoy me. And I think that would be a great exercise, because you're coming at him from right now in a freshly academic point of view. And you're of the younger generation. So your point of view on even some of his archetypes and characters might be very different from mine, being the old veteran hoofer. So let's play a protagonist game for a second with the next chapter of Inside Pynchon. I have a problem with his protagonists. And his protagonists are usually male losers, hippie freaks, and by his own definition, schlemiels. There's the schlemiel and the schlemazel. So the schlemiel drops the soup into the lap of the schlemazel. It's an old Yiddish phrase. And Benny Profane from V is the archetype of an anti-hero Pynchon protagonist who repeats over and over throughout his oeuvre. Benny Profane is a slob. He's half employed. He's bald. He probably looks a little like me if Pynchon would see me ranting right now. He's heavier set. He's got ketchup spilled on his t-shirt. He rides the subway. He tries to get laid, isn't always successful. and shit just happens to him. He has almost no agency
Yeah.
and very little opinion. And that's Benny Profane. And he's central to be the counterpoint to Stencil, whom you brought up, who is the world traveler and trying to figure out this V thing. And then you have Tyrone Slothrop, who's the guy who gets the boners in anticipation of the V2 landing in London. And he is Benny Profane all over again. He's sloppy. He's got mustard on his uniform. He just wants to go out there and get laid. And he's like Marvin in Pulp Fiction. He doesn't really have an opinion, usually. He gets wiser to it and he starts to figure it out. And he runs away from the system. And eventually he tries to join and organize this counterforce. So he's got a little bit more volition than Benny, but he's pretty much Benny all over again. And then you've got Zoid Wheeler in Vinland, and Zoid is Benny. He just throws himself through plate glass windows once a year. He's a con man and a hustler. He's a hippie and he's a bum. And he just wants to milk off the government and be a pain in the ass and grow his weed. Just leave me alone already, right? And then you've got Hicks McTaggart recently in Shadow Ticket, and he's a lot like Doc Sportello. So Doc Sportello in Inherent Vice is high all the time. He's stumbling through his case, and he's like a dumb Columbo. It's less about him figuring shit out than him just stumbling into one conspiracy after another. Now, my take on this male, hippie, loser protagonist for Pynchon is that the system, right, is patriarchal, authoritarian, and oppressive. And the Pynchon counterforce to that is the neutered male. He has no agency. He's kind of a moron, and shit just happens to him. So that gets his hero off the hook, and it enables his hero, in a sense, to start to maybe sort of figure it out that he's being used too. Now, I'll give you back the mic. I want to contrast that to his female protagonist. Oedipa Maas from Crying of Lot 49 is a go-getter. She's female. She wants to figure out this Tristero business, and she's enveloped in this situation, and she's hauling ass trying to figure it out, get her out of it, right? Maxine Tarnow, right, in Bleeding Edge, who I think is a thinly veiled portrait of Pynchon's own wife, frankly, that he married and lived with on the Upper West Side.
Yeah.
She is also a creature of agency. She is trying to get to the heart of the matter here, and she's not having it. And the Twin Towers have come down, and his world is upside down, and she's a go-getter going to do it. So, in a nutshell, my problem with Mr. Pynchon is I really hate his protagonists. I think they're bums, they're hippie fucks, they're losers, and I have trouble with this contrarian hipster nostalgia from the 60s. Oh, Doc Sportello is so cool. I just think he's a douchebag and a bum. And the same goes for most of his other male characters who aren't evil or plotting or building the conspiracy. And to me, my last point, his bigger novels work because this hippie fuck loser is enmeshed within an astonishing, detailed, interwoven, complex, brilliantly described and orchestrated world of immense complexity and sophistication. Gravity's Rainbow begins with that ride up the elevator, right? And it's
Yes.
really an ascent, right? And it self-referentially describes Gravity's Rainbow with the steam and the pistons and the gears and the cranking. It's steampunk. So you mentioned American Gothic, and I think it's steampunk too, and it's glorious. And the same rules apply for V, to your point about the mystery.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever one of his hippie fuck losers is in this masterful construct of world building and intricacy and complexity, then the contrast between the two gets me through. But when one of these hippie fuck losers becomes the whole point of the book, like Inherent Vice and even recently Shadow Ticket, I'm tuned out. I'm like, Tom, you've
Yeah.
lost me. So anyway, that's a big unloading. But I
Yeah.
wanted to set this up as what I love, hate, and hate love about one of my favorite writers, which is, ironically enough, he sentimentalizes an anti-hero that does not appeal to me subjectively. And
Yeah.
he turns a douchebag and a loser into a hero, and I don't buy it.
Mm. That is that is an interesting perspective, man. I would just say, I guess not even my counterpoint, but just the slightly different way I look at it is, I do agree that a Pynchon novel, the longer novels, in a way, they work better and they're more interesting because you're not just, yeah, like he's not a traditional novelist where he's not gonna have a really deep characterization and there's not a lot of depth there. But here's the thing. It's kind of, let me see if I can put this. Um, let's start with maybe Inherent Vice. So that one, yes, yes, he's a very limited as a character, but like Slothrop, he's clearly caught up in this world. He doesn't understand. He gets high, and is the way in which he's a loser or whatever, like Benny, and I
Yeah.
don't think Pynchon is. I don't think he's making them a hero as much as he's portraying the hapless modern person in the midst of a world that has become kind of incomprehensible, where the bad guys and the bad systems just seem to keep running amok and turning self-destructive, and in a way that it's like we can't do anything about it. So I just see his characters at his most basic level. They're like avatars of that sense of collective helplessness, but also I think he is the better of those characters. Like Maxine does use her ingenuity, and Doc to a certain extent, Doc Sportello. They do end up using their ingenuity or their like Doc. It's funny. Doc has he has hold on, get this right. Doc has a sensitive nose, I believe, and then Maxine, it's her bladder that's sensitive, and Slothrop, it's his penis.
Hey,
Oh,
I love this, and it's an angle that I ignored, which is he's projecting the common man in the midst of this labyrinthine hellscape of control, authoritarianism, and entropy.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And and I get that is not satisfying on a traditional level of the novel, and it's part of why I think Pynchon is alienating. He's difficult to get into for many people who are used to a more, traditional kind of novel. Not saying that's you, but like it's just in general, I find Pynchon is he's a hard sell to even get into it. And it's related to this flaw. It's related to this. Yeah.
Yeah. I think his prose is super dense and he's multi-genre. So within only a paragraph, within a single paragraph, it'll be fantasy, science fiction, goth, historical documentary, science, all blended together, usually when he's on fire, like Gravity's Rainbow, seamlessly. The
Yeah.
guy is cranking. And that's what blew my mind when I first read it is I didn't think that you could do that and do that so well. And I think it's a double-edged kind of situation. If you're receptive to that, and if you're well read enough to understand at least 20% of his references, then it'll blow your mind. And whether or not you dig the characters or not, just the execution of the prose is phenomenal and mind-blowing.
I think, yeah, but you know what? I do also think, though, at the same time, the as far as kind of the idea about maybe you do have to have some background knowledge of certain things to kind of,
Yeah.
to get into it, or to see what he's unraveling. But at the same time, I find he stimulates your curiosity. It's so wondrous. Like you feel like he's read everything in this. Again, it's intimidating in a certain way and maybe annoying for some people, but I just find the immersion in the wealth of reference. Like I like my questions about life and my questions about what's real, and like he's interacting with that in this way that mirrors the just the strangeness of life today. Like life that's it's awash in um in film, in social media, in images. There's a certain kind of groundlessness to things, and I find the tension of one of the tensions that his protagonists navigate is they're they're looking for like what's at work at the bottom of things. Oedipa, she gets drawn into this mystery of the Tristero, right? Uh, uh, or anyway, there's this like search for some ground or ground of grounds, or I don't know, something like, sometimes it's not God, him or herself itself, but it's, his characters are searching for that. Yeah.
They are. But to me, though, the guys are mostly slackers. They're either
Yeah.
diabolical instruments of authoritarian entropy, or they're slackers. It's like bottle rockets with Owen Wilson. It's the same kind of character. And he neuters them deliberately. And I think you make a fantastic point that it's deliberate in the sense of creating this avatar of the common man. You're thrown into it. You have no idea what's going on. Bartleby the Scribner, I prefer not to. It's this mentality that everything is so insane that participating is even more crazy. And we're better off just throwing in the towel before we even begin because everything is so corrupt, broken, bureaucratic, and oppressive. My challenge, though, is, and in ways he might even have been ahead of his time, because look at the movies that have become so popular. Look at the music. Coldplay. How does Coldplay compare to the post-industrial punk scene in Manchester? I mean, you have Joy Division, which was very grim, but then you've got Coldplay, which is it lacks balls. It's like Ian Curtis was throwing fits on stage and shadow play was going down, and it was existential angst, but with force and anger. And then the zeitgeist has shifted into this whiny emo stuff, which has become ubiquitous. And in ways, Pynchon's sensibility is similarly whiny emo when it comes to these slackers caught in the mess.
See, that's really interesting. Uh I see, well, I think like the industrial kind of music of like yeah, just the whole industrial 80s and 90s kind of stuff. Uh, to me, like the human being caught in the monstrous machine and the grinding of gears and the maybe it is like you're saying, maybe it is the whiny I kind of the whiny individual, but like the world in which they are, it's very uh hard and industrial.
How do you react to it? Like, I used to love Echo and the Bunnymen at their prime, and they were
Yes,
a Manchester.
absolutely.
Ian McCulloch and Will Sargent, and it was deliberately mechanical. It was industrial. You had DeFreitas playing these patterns on the drum set, and it was like machine music, only sophisticated and very well written. Even Pete Townsend from The Who said, you know, those Bunnymen really know how to write songs back in the day, Heaven Up Here. And the reason I bring them up is McCulloch used to sing like Jim Morrison. Like, you know, a promise, you know, he's bellowing and he's letting it out and he's fighting that system. He's up against the machine and he's pouring his heart out. And then the next generation is Chris Martin. And
Yeah.
what happened? And I bring this up within the context of our favorite writer, Thomas Pynchon. And in ways, I'm pointing a finger at Tom, which is like Benny Profane, Tyrone Slothrop, even recently, Hicks McTaggart. These guys are like Chris Martin. They're emo and they're whining their way through the machine. And I want some machismo, Tom. I want a hero with balls.
That's really interesting, man.
And it's women, but and then you know, as I brought up, you know, Adipa,
yeah,
right? And Maxine, right?
yeah,
They're doing it. Tom allows his female protagonists to go out there and kick ass and take names. They're inquisitive, they've got agency, and they're not putting up with this shit. And his men are like these whiny emo creatures that are like balls going back and forth, a pinball machine.
yeah. I mean, I wonder. So you have, these moments of, so there's, like Dixon and, you know, again, Mason and Dixon we haven't talked about
Okay,
too much.
that's its own thing. We can talk about them for sure, right?
Yeah,
That's kind of a separate thing, and I
yeah.
want to dive into that book because arguably I think that's an eternal masterpiece. That book, that is mind blowing. That book,
Right, right. And the one thing I was going to bring up, and I think I could try to relate it to some of these characters that we've already talked about, but you know, Dixon has this moment at the end where he grabs the slave driver's whip, and you know, it very much exercises agency. Again, maybe it's
he's had enough. The whole book, he's been conciliatory, and he's kind of fit
yeah,
the mold that I've been complaining about.
yeah,
And he finally snaps, just like when Tyrone finally has had enough. You know, Tyrone runs away, and then the counterforce. Dixon
yeah,
is analogous to that. There is an arc to the slacker to the real hero.
yeah. I mean, um, yeah, and I think of maybe even what does he do? I think maybe Slothrop at one point he grabs some part from was it from something that's cutting down trees or something? Or like I think the narrator instructs him like, here's something you could do.
The wall comes down, and Tom actually talks directly to Tyrone and says, you know,
Yeah.
you shouldn't put up with that. It's almost like Pynchon himself got sick of his Weasley protagonist. Like, do something already.
Yeah, for sure. And you have also, and you have in again, I think your point does still stand when it comes to like Zoe Wheeler of Vineland, but even then you have like the sisterhood of the kunoichi attentives. What is it? Anyway, yeah, and you have these so those are like, again, they're female though. To your point though, these
And
are
that's what I'm saying. Even the
the butt
secondary
kicking.
and tertiary women are all kicking ass. Pynchon
Yeah,
allows his female characters to actually have agency.
yeah. That is, yeah. I mean, but it's funny because in the early, there's the whole thing, at least in the academic world, of like this pushback against, Pynchon's his portrayals of women, at least in the early novels. It's like in the later ones, I think that they get more, you know, the more dynamic.
More
Um,
heroic.
yeah, exactly. So I think to some extent that critique stands for both men and women, but I think you're onto something there. I got to think about that. Like, yeah,
Yeah, and I don't mean to nitpick a genius's oeuvre,
you
but
should. But yeah,
yeah, but that's our jobs.
it,
We're so vested and we're so engaged in this man's genius that
yeah,
when he disappoints and we makes conscious, really well thought out decisions that we disagree with, it's kind of like science. Like physicists now can't wait for the Large Hadron Collider to find an anomaly, right? Scientific revolutions are led by crisis. So if you keep running experiments and everything is to expectation, nothing interesting comes out. And the fact that I hate my favorite writer's protagonists reveals a lot about him and his writing, but also points in creative directions for me as a writer too, which is I wrote a book and I have a character who is not Tyrone Slothrop. He displays qualities of the slacker, but I've turned him into a Zoomer Gen Z male. So he's a hustler, he's a con man, he's an extreme sports enthusiast, he's drug addicted, sex addicted, and he's really a piece of shit kind of person. But I believe that he's likable, and here's the thing. I give this mofo volition. He drives the story with his own stupidity, ineptitude, and greed. But I got so frustrated, for example, with my favorite writer turning every story into a Coldplay concert that I wanted to conscientiously take a different path. And I think I did, but I
that's.
think this is what makes literary criticism interesting. You know,
I
when you
want to
fall
see.
in love with a writer and you don't just spend hours kissing that guy's ass and going on Reddit and telling everyone, "Oh, I love this book." It's finding flaws in the people we respect the most.
Absolutely. No, that is so good. And I think your whole kind of comparison to Coldplay is hilarious. You should definitely write, if you haven't put words to that in an essay. I
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Why Thomas Pynchon's heroes are like Chris Martin.
Oh, it's really funny.
Here's another angle on this, and I think it's a halo effect, and I don't know if it's cause or effect. You know, cat chasing its tail. But let's talk about Pynchon's politics for a second,
mhm.
because I think these are connected, and I think this will resonate with you. And I'm really interested in hearing your opinion about my opinion about what you think Pynchon is about too.
Yeah.
I think Pynchon, if you put him in a category, is like a progressive liberal. If you look at the contemporary landscape of American politics, he believes in the inherent equality of all human beings. He's resentful and even guilty about his WASP past. He makes fun of it in Gravity's Rainbow. The Roseland ballroom scene where Tyrone literally goes down the toilet becomes an expose on everything horrible about America from a racist point of view. And it's a beautiful piece of writing. It's evocative, it's horrific. It's so deep and meaningful and gorgeous in its exposition, but it's fundamentally pointing a finger at the male, white, heterosexual, implicitly and systemically racist underpinning of the United States of America. And he sees these faults as an outcome even of thermodynamics. That's one of the beauties of the book, where he connects these to mathematical and scientific principles in a deterministic kind of way. I mean, who did that? Pynchon is awesome. But at the same time, I'm showing that Pynchon has an agenda here. He's not a value neutral kind of guy. He's a guy who grew up ashamed of his background. He was ashamed of what America had become. And he points a finger at the white, male, heterosexual douchebag who has created this society, which is so intrinsically flawed, unequal, and horrible at its heart, as its core. Like William S. Burroughs wrote that if you feel America, you feel the rottenness that is oozing out of the soil. We took this land from the indigenous population. We are conquerors. We are oppressors. I am one of them. And this is my testament to everything that we fucked up about America. And here is why. And now I'm not saying that he's right or wrong. I'm merely saying that that's the lens that I believe Thomas Pynchon views America. And this reverberates throughout Mason Dixon, too. If you really pay attention to Mason Dixon, it's no different, I believe, than what I just espoused, which is you have an old school WASP who happens to be a literary genius who hates what his people has done and sees it as something that needs to be course corrected.
So, yeah, no, you're, I think I agree with you up to a point, and this is exactly something to talk about. So, I'm going to try not to get long-winded here, because this taps into something
I've been long-winded. You please be long-winded.
Well, no, it's great. No, it's great stuff. Because, so there is a Pynchon's curious relationship with what America is, like what it was supposed to be, the dream of America versus the reality of what it became. So that runs throughout his body of work, and again, that's part of what inspired me to to address his work in terms of the American Gothic. And and I do think, and I do include within that designation like Herman Melville. The big three would be Herman Melville, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and Edgar Allan Poe. But the very first novelist in America, or first professional novelist, was Charles Brockden Brown, who wrote a Gothic novel called Violend, an American tale about this this guy who he is the son of a well, anyway, I'm not going to try to describe that, but so long story short, but what Pynchon and this American Gothic tradition is on about, part of it is this wrestling with the dream of America, the hope for a truly democratic space. It's some escape from the horror of the past, the ceaseless horror of the past, an escape from the monarchical authoritarian. It's America is the original zone of freedom, like the hope for America, and it gets betrayed over and over and over again. And so I think my read of and I don't think I'm like, I find it difficult to be precise enough when talking about this, but my general read of his politics is that, yes, he's on the progressive left, you could call it, but it's a leftism that it's reconnecting with like what it's not just on the left. It's seeking for something that's truer and more like something that retrieves this almost utopian dream that cannot be. And but yeah, anyway, there's a tension implicit in anything like a utopian sense of America or utopianism in general. And so Pynchon is exploring that tension between the utopian and the ways in which that turns to horror. Anyway, America and the modern world is supposed to be this almost utopian space that's turned on its head, and American literature constantly explores that, I think. Yeah.
I agree. It's just, how does he get there? And how does he evoke that sensibility? And then what does he prioritize and what does he deprioritize? So I've been ranting about his emasculated males and his hyper empowered females. And that's a very lefty progressive sensibility too. Look at Hollywood. Look at the trajectory of Star Wars, where you have the Lucasfilm Disney sequels. And what happened was the old favorites, who were very masculine, very machismo, the Han Solos of the world, the Luke Skywalkers, the coming of age story, they're supplanted and they're flipped. Han Solo, when he reappears in the sequel, is old and washed up, and he's back to his old selfish bootlegging ways. And Luke is isolated on an island drinking alien slop from the teat of some ostrich creature. And then you have Rey, who is the empowered female superhero who is flawless, learns everything instantly, and is the ultimate girl boss. Now, politically, I'm neither left nor right. So I don't support one extreme or the other. I tend to think of myself as a libertarian, in that less government is better. And I think I have an objective view as to what's wrong with both sides of the political equation, especially these days, especially with the reigning administration being on one extreme, right? Going from one, we're ping pong back and forth. But I'm trying to evoke that Pynchon's sensibility is very 60s hippie, hanging out with Richard Farina, whom he dedicated Gravity's Rainbow to. You know, Pynchon is the weed smoking hippie guy on the beach who happens to be a fucking literary genius.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he's also really hard on the hippies, and I think he's the complexity of Vineland, and even of maybe to a lesser extent the loose adaptation of it, One Battle After Another, which is a whole other subject.
That's a whole other thing.
And the readings, I get kind of frustrated with the way in which One Battle After Another was taken as by many people as some kind of a simply, like, I don't know, some kind of a woke, like, these are critiques about it, some kind of woke leftist thing or something. There's more going on there. You know, I kind of disagree with it.
There's way, and the Paul Thomas adaptation is, you have the core characters and their relationships with each other, but that's where the similarities essentially stop with the book.
That's right.
And if anything, Paul Thomas Anderson is agreeing with me. It's like Inherent Vice, the movie, was a mess. If you didn't read the source material, and if you weren't like a Pynchon acolyte like you and I are, you're like, literally, what the fuck is going on here? And part of the problem too was Doc being this weed smoking slacker. There's no hero. There's no arc of a hero story here. You're a viewer stumbling through this mess of a narrative, as is the protagonist in the book. And Paul Thomas adapting the new movie, Inherent Vice, was a complete flop. I think it made only $14 million, and it cost twice that much just to make.
It's his least. I love Paul Thomas Anderson, but it's the least of his films, probably. Yeah.
And I blame the source material. And I think Thomas Anderson loves Pynchon. And I think they're friends. They hang out together. And he's like, I want to make another one of your books, Tom, but we're not going to fuck it up this time. And I'm going to listen indirectly to Mookie, which is, I'm going to make the protagonist.
The secret sauce is Mookie.
Well, we're going to crank this up. They're going to blow shit up, Tom. They're actually going to do something to fight the system instead of like hanging around and waiting for shit to happen.
Right. So
It's almost like Paul fixed it, which is like, I love you, Tom, but we're not going to make the same mistakes like we did with Inherent Vice. I'm going to keep the core characters, and I get what you're doing with the core theme of the book, but we're going to blow this shit up. We're going to have fun with it, and we're not going to be restrained with this delicate slackerism. We're going to let these characters go apeshit. And it worked. It was a huge hit, critically and commercially.
definitely. Yep. Yeah, it's I think you're probably right about that.
I wonder what Tom felt about it. I think watching it, he's like, "Oh well, you know, this is like Vinland on meth."
Right. But Vinland is, but Vineland, it's wild though. There's stuff in there that I think that one battle after another didn't approach. Like there was all this kind of weird things about UFOs and the
Oh,
paranormal dimensions and of Pynchon's work. He didn't even come anywhere close to that. And there's yeah,
you brought up
kind of
the paranormal dimension, and you're a theology guy, right? And I
yeah.
want to talk about Against the Day now.
Oh
And I
yeah.
think that's a perfect transition because the paranormal shit goes left field in Against the Day to the point where I think Pynchon was believing in the spirit world, right? It's like they're animated and they're amongst us and they're influencing history, and he infuses his usual conspiracy theory construct with the occult in
Yeah.
ways that take it to a whole new level. So what's your impression of his longest, most sprawling novel that came out? When was it? 2006?
Six, I think. 2006. Yeah. Um Overall, I really dig it, honestly. I think, but here's the thing. It's beyond centerless. Like, I think it's maybe six different threads that are all vying with one another, and they're all, um,
It traverses with the Traverse family.
yes, yes. Um, I, again, I think there's so many flaws to it, but but the way it just lets itself loose with just ideas I think it captured, and for those who haven't encountered this yet, this novel, it's set between 1893 and the years just after World War I, so it kind of captures this
World's Fair. It's kind of starting at the World's Fair,
at the World's Fair in Chicago. Yep.
and it
And
goes into the war.
yeah, and it captures this journey and that historical moment from like the excitement of the it's the end of the 19th century and there's this new century and there's these new possibilities and the main characters are the chums of chance, as we start off at least. The
Yeah.
chums of chance, and they're balloonists, or they're these airmen, and they're gonna and there's a sense of youthfulness and all these new, there's electricity that's being conquering the world, and lights and cars, anyway. So but then it's like that, as typical in Pynchon's stories, like it turns to horror, it turns to but in a way that's not as oppressive and gloomy as Gravity's Rainbow. It's lacking, maybe in a good way, but maybe in a negative way. It's lacking, Against the Day is lacking that, almost like the sinister, like, I don't know. It's just so out there, and it's so loop the loop, and it's so doesn't know what it wants to be, that for me, I just saw it as like this idea engine. Like I'm just strapped to this engine of ideas, and I loving it, but it also doesn't work as a anything like a coherent story. I don't. Well, I mean, maybe that's too harsh, but it, it's hard to get a handle on.
It's totally fair. And in ways, it's everything Mookie's complained about Thomas Pynchon 10x. 10x. You have
Yes.
you have especially the male characters stumbling through the story. They have no agency whatsoever, it seems to me. Even the chummies, some of the prose is unbelievably gorgeous. Like that ballooning sequence is just masterful writing. And throughout the book, you'll be churning through this kind of hermeneutic manuscript where, to your point, it just keeps going on and on and on. It's got no center, ostensibly deliberately. And he just keeps cranking. And it's, go ahead.
And yet the thing about that, and it's hard to put words to this, but it's in that very centerlessness, in the very elusiveness of any coherent through line that you could just point to, yet it's still, like all of Pynchon's works, there's this sense of connectedness and this sense that things are, like, he's creating this multi-layered portrait of the way things are in all their layers and all of their complexities, and he does that in a way that I find enlivening and that I find is grasping after the real, and again, that's, I think, the many engagements with, so there's like both Western and Eastern religion and shamanism and all the Hermetic tradition and
stuff, the tarot, the angel,
everything. Yeah.
the Kabbalah is in there.
Yeah.
Very, very much. You know what's awesome? I love the way you've characterized it. Gravity's Rainbow, if you look at it structurally, is a parabola. When you read the book, it's like the early chapters are the launch. It's a deliberative liftoff. And by the time you get to the counterforce at the end, it's like gravity has taken over. Literally when you're reading Gravity's Rainbow, when the power has cut, because that's the big decision that's made on the part of the rocket, right? It's got the internal guidance system, and it's all about, I think it's called what, Anschluss or what?
Branschluss. Yeah.
Branschluss, right. It's when you cut the power and then it becomes a projectile. And the book itself is recursive in its narrative format. Right when you've got Branschluss and the narrative starts to become a projectile. And in an analogous way, Against the Day is a balloon ride. It's no accident that it opens like that, which is you're heating it up and you're filling the balloon and then you leave the earth. But balloons have limited volition and agency. They're buffeted by the atmosphere. And Against the Day is this transcendent genius having a balloon ride of his own indulgence. And if you look at it that way, it's masterful and kind of interesting. I just found it incredibly tedious to the point of being boring. And again, indulgent in all aspects of what I don't like about Pynchon, which is going off on forever tangents, being highly, highly political in his own way, and not holding back to the point where you really lose sight of exactly what the hell he's trying to accomplish here. And again, heroes with no real control of their own circumstance. So I just found that book really interesting. I think the New York Times reviewer, Margolis, reviewed it. And she said, imagine a book written by a Pynchon fan, which is a satirical take on Pynchon. And then you end up with Against the Day.
I would be Against the Day. Yeah.
Everything, it's like Pynchon against Pynchon. So I don't know. Maybe he reached a point in his life where he was just kind of kicking back, and maybe he was content and relaxed, and the weed finally caught up. Here's one aspect. Thomas Pynchon literally came out and said marijuana is very, very useful, and his brain seems to be wired and said, like, if I smoke a joint, I am completely dysfunctional. I've got like an ADHD brain. Like, give me 120 milligrams of Adderall and I'm on it for 6 hours. And I'm really not a diagnosed and I'm not a treated ADHD person, but I think, that's realistically the effect. If I've done recreational drugs, I've always gravitated towards speed and not the downers, because I'm dopamine deprived. I need it. If I smoke weed, I'm checked out. I think Pynchon's brain is wired in such a way that he's the kind of guy, he smokes weed, he's in there. He could sit there with his graph paper. He writes everything by hand, right?
I've
He
heard,
writes
yeah.
everything by hand on graph paper in these kind of block letters. That's how this guy writes. So he's high and he's kicking it, and he's got his graph paper and he's got a stack of his reference books that he's reading and relating, and he's in the zone. And I think against the day, he got so comfortable with his own writing methodology that he lost himself in his own bullshit. That's what I think happened.
I think maybe so. You know what it is? You know what it is though? I think, again, what gets me going in that it's on a sentence by sentence basis. Like, again, I don't want to be too forgiving of it, but it just,
I admit it's gorgeous. If you take isolated blocks from against
yeah,
the day, and you don't need to plow through all that Pynchon bullshit,
yeah,
you have some of the best written prose ever in Against the Day.
yeah,
But they're diamonds in the rough. It's like he's in the zone, his own zone, and he's doing his thing, and boom. So it could have used an editor, and I hate to say that, but how nowadays it's a whole specialty. You're a developmental editor. I hate that. I literally have convulsions when I hear someone's a developmental editor. I go, don't even get near me.
right. Yeah, yeah.
He could have really used a little bit of feedback on it, which is Tom. It's the fucking book is what? It's 1,100 pages long.
What's the? It's like the George Lucas syndrome, right? Or like like you get to a certain level of, and then you don't have anyone to really properly check you, and how could you like
How can
wonder?
you go wrong? You're so used to smelling your own farts that all the self-doubt that got you to be the genius you are now is gone. And then your own worst tendencies have an opportunity to dominate and overwhelm what could otherwise be another masterpiece that you produce. So, all right, Tom, this turd is 1,100 pages long, and I see about 550 pages of pure brilliance. So, how about we chop, buddy?
Well, it is interesting that he went and wrote these very relatively pared down novels in his last, 3 so far.
But they're structurally so different, though. Look at,
Yeah.
I did an analysis of my own book. I pumped my own book into Claude, and I did a line by line analysis because I took this unique approach to essentially writing in tweets. My whole fucking novel is written in tweets. Now, if you do the same thing with Pynchon, let's say, and you put it into an LLM, not to steal it per se, but just to analyze it based on the density of the prose and the length of the paragraphs. His books are in two categories. They're the dense, encyclopedic, Herman Melville, Moby Dick style boom books, okay, which I think are his masterpieces, except for Against the Day, for all the reasons that we're citing. And these are specifically V, Gravity's Rainbow, Mason Dixon, right? Boom, boom, boom. That to me is Pynchon.
Yeah.
Then you got these, what I consider the in-between and filler novels, which are what I call the hippie fuck novels. That's the Crying a Lot 49. And then you've got less or so because it's a little bit different. But then you've got the other ones, like, again, Vinland and Inherent Vice and recently Shadow Ticket are the density of the prose, the length of time and effort and interconnectivity, and what we would classically consider Pynchon. It's almost like it's written by a different author.
Yeah, yeah. It kind of, well, but again, one of those I find first off, I agree with you that like the prime Pynchon is definitely, V, Gravity's Rainbow, Mason and Dixon. But
That's boom, boom, boom. If the guys should be remembered forever for those books.
yeah, definitely. But it's like even within that that trio of books, they all kind of feel very different in their style. Like in terms of
Oh,
V is, you know what I mean? Like there's a commonality, of course, and there's tendencies and threads and all that, but just V is just feels so different from Gravity's Rainbow, and Gravity's Rainbow is obviously very different from this hyper stylized 18th century Mason and Dixon, and then within the shorter novels too, I find uh, the like Inherent Vice, it feels very different from Bleeding Edge, even though they're separated by just 4 years, even though they're ostensibly, more limited, detective character novels. Like Pynchon really changes it up. And I like that. It kind of reminds me of one of my favorite filmmakers is Stanley Kubrick.
oh,
And Kubrick, he did like a different genre almost every film. And, like, wow, the same guy that made The Shining made, 2001: A Space
2001.
Odyssey, you know, and I find it's somewhere in the universe of similarity I find with Pynchon. Um, but yeah, but often it is some of the worst tendencies, as you're describing, do get amplified when in his latter years, when his, they become, overdone, and yeah, he'd reached Brentzless.
Yeah, exactly. The last line in Some Like It Hot. Nobody's perfect.
Right.
You happen to be a man. That's okay. We'll make do. And our favorite genius writer, well, he's got his own indulgences and his own peccadillos, and that's what makes him great. And your point is really well taken, though. I have this tendency of lumping him into genius Pynchon and slacker hippie bullshit Pynchon. And I think that that's an unfair generalization, because to your point, and it's an excellent point, each of the genius Pynchon books are very distinct, and each of the hippie bullshit Pynchon books
So funny.
are
Uh,
very much very different too.
Forever, that is going to be the category, Mookie. But I think of these wonderful. Uh,
Right. Right. So how does all this translate? You mentioned that you're a writer too, and this podcast ostensibly is dedicated to people who love writing, the battle between human writing, and AI now, and we could talk a little bit
yes,
about that, because you're in a sense coming of age into this insane craziness of the singularity. And then you love Pynchon. Do you find that he influences you? How does it feel to be your own writer in this age? I mean, let's take everything that we've churned through and make it more personal about you.
sure. I mean, my as far as my output goes, like I had phases where I was influenced by particular writers. There was the Lovecraft phase, and then there was the Cormac McCarthy. I wrote also Flannery O'Connor. Again, this sort of Southern Gothic, um, and then uh, for a brief moment, I thought I could do like a Melvillian, a Melville style, whatever. But long story short, the novel, I call it my eternal unfinished novel. One day, maybe it will be, but that one is to a fault influenced, I think, by Pynchon. But it's again the influence. At least initially, it wasn't just that. Oh, I was so in love with this one writer. It was just that Pynchon is such a master of what we are as a society that I couldn't help but because I'm trying to tell the truth and trying to find the funny. Like I'm trying to process through this story something about the strangeness of our times. There's a character who's he is a bit of a an Oedipus type character. Um, he is on this.
Please give him balls. Give him cojones.
Yeah, definitely. It's
Infuse them with at least a little bit of testosterone. Just
Mookie.
please.
Mookie, rest assured, it's a quest for balls. It's a he's on a quest for balls.
Nice. Nice.
So yeah, no, but funnily enough, by the way, David Foster Wallace, who we haven't talked about at all, I'm not a huge, I think he's brilliant in all kinds of ways, but interestingly, David Foster Wallace, who was influenced by Pynchon as well, he, his first novel, he wrote Broom of the System. He later went on to say, like, I didn't even know it at the time, but he realized he had basically rewritten Crying a Lot 49. And that, again, not at all comparing myself to David Foster Wallace, but like, I think because David Foster Wallace is such a, he's, I mean, he's brilliantly perceptive, right? And that's one of my aims, is just to be perceptive and to be, to see what's actually there. I think he couldn't help but tell a similar story as Pynchon, because he's trying, he's in the same stew that Pynchon. It's not just that Pynchon is cooked up; it's that Pynchon is part of and is mirrored back to us in this very dynamic and interesting way. And so, in that sense, the more I read of Pynchon, the more I realized how much I'm part of the stew of things that Pynchon has so brilliantly written about, but also brilliant. And I say brilliantly, but I also, to your point, which is I'm liking your critiques, even if I need to think about them more. I think, to your point, even with Pynchon's brilliance, he is also reflecting something about our lack of characterization, our lack of agency, our haplessness, the way we're hippie. I mean, we're Chris Martins or whatever, And fiction should kind of push on that, maybe, and maybe
Right.
but in a way that's also, anyway. There's a bad way of doing that, and there's an interesting way of doing that, and I love that you're kind of on about attempting to weave something that is on the that's dealing with that. So in my own way, I've also trying to do that with my work. But
I think that's really on point, which is what's the zeitgeist? Which John Updike, of all people, called it the quotidian, which is, how do people talk? What do they believe? How do they feel about things? What's the impact of technology and history and society on how we look at ourselves in the world? And then what does that have to do with literature? And the answer is everything. So to your great point, Pynchon did a great job of tapping into that zeitgeist.
yes,
and really pumping it through, as did David Foster Wallace. An infinite jest is what's always compared to Pynchon. And
yeah,
and in ways, David Foster Wallace took the good and the bad from Pynchon that way.
yeah. I as you're saying that out loud, I'm just, again, I don't want to be too hard on a novel I honestly haven't finished. I made it halfway through Infinite Jest, and one day, I think I will read it. Yeah, I think it does deserve to be read in full. But the way that you see Against the Day is the way that a lot of the way I feel about Infinite Jest, and
100%.
I wonder, I do kind of wonder if it, like, just as David Foster Wallace was influenced by Pynchon, I wonder if Pynchon was almost trying to outdo his progeny, his literary progeny. Against the Day is very much published 10 years after Infinite Jest, right? And I wonder if Pynchon had read that and, like, you know what I mean?
I think that's an absolutely brilliant observation I never thought about. And I think it really could ring true, because Infinite Jest, in terms of its strength, is really how these encyclopedic narrative geniuses really fire on all cylinders. The genres keep changing, layering of the prose. So you read a paragraph and it's simultaneously saying about 18 things at the same time. And if you reread it and you read it after you've read later parts of the narrative, it's a living, breathing thing because it's layered so intricately and so brilliantly. That's both Pynchon and David Foster Wallace at their best.
Absolutely.
And this transcendent erudition. And David Foster Wallace took that to its extreme postmodern bullshit with the endless footnotes and citations and his apparent hatred of irony and all that horse shit that he kept going on about. You know, so he's got his own excesses, but he's clearly gifted. And Infinite Jest was his magnum opus. And you bring out a great point because around halfway through Infinite Jest, after you meet all the characters, the major themes are evoked of addiction related to extreme physical ability, like the tennis star,
yes,
and the drug addicts coexisting and interwoven because it's an element of the same thing, our addicted culture, right? We're a culture of consumerism and addiction. Yep. And that's what makes for excellence. You need to be addicted to doing what you're doing to be excellent at it. And he was an addicted writer too. I mean, and he suffered from depression. So he's really writing about himself this whole time. And that worked. And about halfway through the novel, it turns into Against the Day, which is these endless explorations. I call it, again, a hermeneutic style where it's writing for writing's sake. And it's not about the coherence of each vignette, but it's about the feeling of diving headfirst into the soup, right?
Yes.
And then you're like, oh, come on, dude.
Yes. So
yeah.
What I can't agree more with that. That's very well put, and you're putting words to some of what I've felt in what I have read of it.
You're bang on point.
What do you and I have you read The Pale King? Because that is the it's technically it's unfinished, it's his third novel. And I find that to be by far, like, he pushes past. I found him, though he has some of the same tendencies that very much still fit the bill that you're describing, he's pushing past them in certain interesting ways. And it's so, I mean, it's tragic on so many levels, but I really thought that one was just head and tails above Infinite Jest. But did you read The Pale King? Did you ever?
Oh, I didn't. I never did. I actually saw David Foster Wallace do a reading of Infinite Jest during the book tour.
No way.
And he shows up in his do-rag and his like his poofy Hawaiian shirt and his little round glasses, and he does readings. And he was on psychoactive meds, so he's taking sips of water constantly because he had dry mouth. It was kind of a tragic figure. He was really doped up on the SSRIs.
Yeah.
He's struggling through his depression. People, one guy even asked him about whether he likes Thomas Pynchon, and he went on this little tangent about Gravity's Rainbow is a great book, but I didn't want it to influence me too much. And then he struck me as being really an asshole and a douche. And I'm not the only one who felt that way about David Foster Wallace personally. I don't mean to disparage the guy, especially posthumously. And we're sitting here acknowledging that he's a literary giant, but I thought he was a jerk. And I went back home and I was about 700 pages into the novel and I had trouble finishing it. Because Gore Vidal made it a point of not meeting the artists of works that he admired because 99% of the time the human disappointed him. And those lines from Palimpsest, his biography, hit me right between the eyes, which is like, oh man, meeting David Foster Wallace completely destroyed my reading of David Foster Wallace. So that's my direct experience with this guy, which is like, ugh.
Totally. And again, this is my kind of maybe this is like looking on the bright side or something too much, but like I do think sometimes we if we get a chance to see people like this in person. Like, we're also seeing them when they're on the stage, and we're getting kind of a it is them, and it is whatever, not to get them off the hook, but we're also seeing the slice of them. And again, I know there's lots of, I'm actually only, well, I'm just slightly informed of some of the, let's just say, the problematic, the things about Foster Wallace. And I know they've come out, and I'm not deep into that stuff, but I know there's stuff out there, and so, but yeah,
It wasn't just the reading, though, and I don't mean to dwell on David Foster Wallace being an
yeah,
asshole. But I mean, just for the sake of it, though, and to dovetail off of what you just said, the reason I was so alienated by this guy, I bought 3 copies, 3 hard copy versions of Infinite Jest for him to sign. He was sitting there at a table, and you can get Infinite Jest first edition signed by David Foster Wallace, right? So
yeah,
I'm standing in line. I got my 3 books, and they're expensive. They're hardcover. I'm like spending like $100 in 90s money to buy 3 fucking copies of his book. And I finally get to him, and he's just shooting off, what's your name? How should I? And I go, dedicated to me, my friend, blah, blah, blah. And I go, I just want to mention that there's an awesome advertisement for tennis rackets, I think. And it has John McEnroe and Eddie Van Halen, and they swapped electric guitar for tennis racket for electric guitar. So you have these transcendent geniuses in their own modalities, and they've swapped. And it made me think of your jest here because of this juxtaposition of obsession, addiction, and talent, and how these things are interchangeable while he's signing.
yeah.
And he looked up at me with the utmost dismissive contempt, which is basically like, get the fuck out of my face. I've got a line of people, and I need to sign another fucking book. And that was the candid moment with the artiste. So instead of showing a little bit of grace, that I'm bringing up this metaphor that I thought was pretty cool. It was a famous ad at that time. He was utterly dismissive. Get the fuck out of my face was his look. And after I already concluded that he was a douchebag during the reading, I was like, oh man, how am I going to go home and read another 50,000 words from this guy?
Yes. Oh man.
Anyway, so God bless you, David Foster. I know you had issues. I've suffered from depression at various points in my life. I can relate. I appreciate your art and what you brought to humanity. God bless, bro. But that doesn't mean you weren't a douchebag.
Right. Then give y'all the, yep.
One other thing I want to bring up is, how I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, I lived on New York's Upper West Side, and, Bleeding Edge takes place there, and Pynchon lives there. And there's a high probability that we might have even crossed paths walking on the street, or we might even sat at different booths next to each other in the same diner. It's possible.
Did you maybe cross in space and time? Or
Yeah, exactly. But here's the thing. Because of my David Foster Wallace experience, I am terrified of meeting Thomas Pynchon, because even though we've been, saying the good, the bad, the ugly about his oeuvre, I admire him more than any other writer to this day. And I'm in awe of works like Gravity's Rainbow and Mason Dixon. And I've got him on the pedestal still, at least in my imagination. And if I would meet the guy at 88 and he's like picking his teeth and, he's an asshole, I'd be like, oh, not him too. Oh.
Right. No, not Pynchon. You can't be fully human and have your...
Just show some humility, please.
Yep. It's, funny, and not to... make too much of this, but so as much as Pynchon is this intimidatingly, for many people, an intimidatingly erudite, writer and all this, I find the posture, I'm not sure if I can put words to this perfectly, but the posture there is this strange humility to like, or an openness to constantly to learning and to like discovering. And there's a you brought up the word grace with relation to the to Foster Wallace and sort of maybe a lack thereof. But it's interesting that Pynchon's largest novel Against the Day, this 1,000 page plus tome, it ends on the word grace. And um and there's something about, again, in the title itself, and this is kind of the unifying thing even amidst the multiplicity. It's like it's it's Pynchon overall, and this novel in many and various ways, it's seeking after the grace that's hidden in the cracks. The title is kind of a quote of scripture, actually, and against the day of judgment and the destruction of the heavens by fire and all this. And Pynchon is like saying, like, yes, we're kind of there, but there's also these strange and surprising kinds of grace at work, and like, what is that about? And even the ways his novels are seeded with songs, and we haven't talked about that, but like
Oh,
the silly songs
he
and all.
loves singing. He personally loves singing, and his characters, it's like reading a musical. The
Yeah,
characters just spontaneously burst into poetry or a singing or
right.
and that's a humanity that's there. That
Yes.
I sense exactly where you're getting at, which is reinforced by some of the themes. So, for example, back to David Foster Wallace, what
Yeah.
is Infinite Jest really about? It's about two types of people. The one are the sports superstars in the tennis academy who are world class athletes. They're at the top of their game, 100% dedication, maniacs when it comes to discipline, and they're naturally talented. They're like transcendent human beings. And then right across the street is the halfway house with the losers, drug addicts, and bums. But most of them are there because they're equally obsessive about their addictiveness. That same energy that goes into creating a tennis superstar goes into a heroin addict who is obsessed, and fixated and can't let it go. And David Foster Wallace himself is like that, which is I'm going to be the best professor at Pomona College. I'm going to be the best writer. I'm going to write for all these magazines, and I'm going to write the best novel ever. I'm going to outdo Herman Melville, James Joyce, and Thomas Pynchon, and it's going to be a bestseller. And I'm going to be world famous, and I'm going to be recognized as this epic personality. And he's out there and he's doing book tours and he's a professor and he's getting involved in affairs that we're hearing about now. And he's struggling with depression, but he's also a megalomaniac. And look at Thomas Pynchon: zero interviews, zero paparazzi, leave me alone. It's not about me, it's about my writing. Interpret it any which way you want. And I'm just going to keep minding my own business and cranking this shit out. Take it or leave it. I'm having a good life. I have my nice wife. I've got my kid, Jackson Pynchon, and go for it. Leave me alone. That says a lot about a person, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Definitely.
think that's what you're getting at here. I think that
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a
It,
humanity here that
it's
other artists might not
yeah.
embody.
It's the yeah, and it's the yeah, that sense of humanity and something um uh there's something profoundly good about the human person and how we're, despite the ways in which we have almost become the rocket itself. Humanity upon the earth has wrought such destruction to the creatures and
Right.
ourselves of the planet and the creation, the capital, in the terms of the kind of the Puritan language of William Pynchon. But it's like Pynchon is constantly, there's just a sense of humanity, the sense of um yeah, I don't know. It's I find that I feel that strongly reading his work, and somehow that stands out. Even it stands out amidst the things that he writes about that are monstrous and off the wall, and the alienation at work and all that kind of those big things. Yeah.
And it's also in juxtaposition to many criticisms of his characters, which beyond my griping is that they're cartoon cutouts.
Yeah.
They're performative. Even the
Yes.
funny names like Tyrone Slothrop, which is obviously a pun on Northrop, then Grumman, an arms manufacturer. And Tyrone is an African American name, which introduces the juxtaposition of the themes: the Roseland Ballroom, the racism, his WASP background. And it shows that Tyrone from birth is this weird hybrid. He is the system. He is this imperial WASP Puritan maniac DNA. And he's Tyrone Slothrop, right?
Yes.
So he's this combination of the two coming together. And all of his character names are goofy. Benny, Profane, Stencil, all the way through Adipa Moss, Wicks Cherry Coke, the narrator of Mason Dixon, right?
Yeah.
So the wick is what brings the light, and Coke is the coal, which is the fuel of the light of illumination. And it's been consumerized. Cherry Coke, right? Which is, again, the ultimate consumer product. That is so Pynchon. But do we learn much about Wicks? I mean, he's the narrator and he's endearing. But who is he? Who the fuck is Wicks Cherry Coke? And for that matter, who the fuck is Mason and Dixon? They're vehicles for Pynchon's exposition and world building. And we never really reach inside a character. It's not very subjective at all.
Yeah.
They're mechanisms of metaphor and symbol and plot and action, unless they're male, because they don't really do anything except get buffeted around the plot. See what I mean?
Right.
So that's the irony here, is that you have a deeply human, deeply feeling personality who writes cartoon cutouts for his characters. They're really devoid of any internal state. It's very expositional.
And these very qualities that you're naming, which I think you're on point. It's almost it's a difficult thing to express, like how one does, like for those who haven't read Pynchon or haven't done the dive and gotten into it, like the fact that you could walk away from portrayals of these very cartoonish characters and these very they're all, the names are allegorical, and they're they're jokes, they're jokes within jokes within jokes, yet somehow cumulatively, at least for me, and I don't speak for everyone, but for me, I do walk away with a sense of the human, and a sense of and again, it's the human under assault and under the human in the grinder of this very mechanized world. And and there's these tender moments, he has these moments, like I actually tear up at the end of Mason and Dixon, like he's talking about his his son and America, and
that imagery of America continuing west. And the imagery of that is deeply emotional and deeply human. It's just pure poetry at the end of that book.
And even a lesser work like Inherent Vice, I believe like the last passage actually gets me. It's about him sort of being in the fog, and maybe he could drive far enough where you couldn't tell anymore who was what kind of person or what, and you would all I don't know, there's a sense maybe of some kind of human oneness, but that's lost in the fog. And there's a sense of there's just this profound there's these moments where the humanity of characters come out. Oh, I know. I know with Doc, there's one moment where Doc, I think he's reflecting on his a memory of him and his mother, and how like when he learned that like we're gonna die, and then like Doc cries and the chapter ends, and it was like, I don't know, I felt I felt that, and I
Even the fog is like a Great Gatsby like moment almost, right? With the
right,
fog and the indistinctness, and then the sense of like the collective consciousness is rolling in there.
yes,
So the humanity does come out, and it's sparing, and that makes it noteworthy. And it's the opposite of just emoting all the time, and it's the opposite of just going on and on about internal states and building backstory. It's basically throwing cartoon characters in this absurdist conspiratorial Pynchon universe,
yeah,
but it feels right. It
absolutely,
feels like it's its own thing, and it's so smart and it's so interconnected usually that the humanity comes out despite these ostensibly shallow two-dimensional characterizations.
that's right, well put.
What have you taken out of it? For example, like what really infused in my own writing is the confidence of not looking at a story from a single vantage point in a single genre.
Yeah,
Pynchon taught me that these boxes that we put ourselves in, science fiction, fantasy, historical drama, personal narrative, biopic, are all kind of bullshit. And you're self-limiting in your imagination and your storytelling is if you box yourself from the beginning and then try to tell a story that's a cozy romantic ghost fantasy, then you might as well sell crypto or real estate, because there's a lot
definitely,
better ways to make money and have a career. And for me, it's like, if you're going to bother writing a novel, go for it and let it out and let your voice sing, and don't be restrictive in terms of genre and expectation. I learned that. And I also learned the power of the narrative voice, which is express your damn opinion. Come out and be your own annotator, because that makes for a thrilling narrative. It adds a layer of complexity and intimacy. And all of a sudden, you as the writer and the narrator are another character in the book. And,
yeah,
and and that's one thing that's prevalent throughout all of Pynchon's novels is he's ubiquitous. He once said, you really just write about yourself. And I learned finally that my writing is good and writing is best when you're really just writing about your own experiences. So in a sense, every character is an extension of him. Every narrative is basically putting him into these situations. And he's never far from the world and the world building and the characters. He's going to come up, he's going to set up the soapbox, and he's going to tell you about thermodynamics and its relationship to government. He's going to tell you about the role of the occult in history, and he's going to do whatever feels right in the moment. And he's going to actually tell you about the narrative itself. There's a ton of meta moments throughout, especially his bigger books. This happens in V to a
definitely,
lesser extent, but it's all over Gravity's Rainbow, where the narrator just starts telling you about the story that he's writing and how he
definitely,
feels about it and where the characters are and where he hopes they're going to get to. And then he pontificates about the historical context, and he reminds you of what you need to know at that point, right? So if you're paying
exactly,
attention, it's not that hard. And he does it throughout. Literally, Mason Dixon is Wick's Cherry Coke narrating the entire story at the fire to the twins. That's the entire fucking novel. So
yeah,
he takes that artifice of Thomas Pynchon as narrator, being a character in the book, telling his own story about himself, and then he puts himself literally in Mason Dixon as doing exactly that.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I
That's
learned that. Thanks, Tom, for better or
right.
for worse. The novel I always wanted to read, I wrote, I feel. And I learned a lot from you, buddy. I learned not to limit myself based on what I thought a genre could or should be. And I
Yeah.
love putting up the podium. I'm going to come out and do whatever the fuck I feel like in my narrative, devoid of a developmental editor telling me it's in the way.
Right.
And
Right.
whether I sell 5 books or 5 million, I don't care. You've created a style of writing and exposition and a depth and an attitude toward writing that I love. And I
Yes.
thank you. Thank you, Thomas Pynchon. You're the man. Even though I
Yeah.
hate your fucking male character.
Even though, yeah, we're we Coldplay-ized.
He
No.
co-plays and I was alluding to this earlier too, that because I think Thomas failed in these protagonists, I doubled and tripled down on my protagonist not being like them. He's
Right.
my protagonist is like an anti Pynchon hero. He's reprehensible and awful, but I think and I hope likable. And he's driving his own goddamn story. And he might be driving it into the ground, but this guy is leading the tale by his own agency. And I think it makes for a better story.
Yeah.
So that's what
Uh,
I learned.
Good stuff, man. Good stuff. A lot of that resonates with me for like that's great. Yeah. I'm not sure how to, if I was just to summarize it, it would be like I see Pynchon, so he's throwing up a mirror to what we are, what we've become, what this this attempt to reckon with the horrors of history and what America could have been and what it's become, but yet he confronts what's dystopian and what has been profoundly disappointing, and he keeps his sense of humor, and keeps on he maintains a posture of openness to what remains to be discovered. There's a to I see this energy of like asking the better question, you know. He's looking for the better question. He's in this almost dialectical, maybe it's a battle with himself or a battle, you know, with the culture that has formed selves like him, maybe, and selves, people, and systems that have come to be. And yeah, he's trying to stay attuned. He wants to, yeah. There's a search for an encounter with some kind of grace at work in the system, and I feel that, and I in my own writing want to also do some version of that is not just a copy of Pynchon and for all his greatness, but also is doing doing something in a unique way.
I think that's terrific. It's not being derivative, but it's being inspired by.
Yeah.
And your take on it, I think, is glorious in the sense of the humanity behind it. That you clearly have a very talented person who's very discerning, obviously very erudite, but also deeply sensitized to the circumstance that he lives within, with real hopefulness that humanity can learn something, that we get better at what we do, and that
And
we can ultimately just make life better for our fellow human. I mean, that's really the underpinning of all of his stuff, which is he's sharing horror as a counterpoint and a counterexample to the paradise that we could create for ourselves if we just pull
yeah,
our heads out of our own asses and do something about it.
yeah, definitely. And maybe we'll find that we're um yeah, like it's our attempt to sometimes it's our attempt to create the paradise that's the heart of what goes so astray, and
Right.
we we need to be, yeah, maybe
A little
consider,
more humble. We need to be a little more humble with
yeah,
what we
yeah, exactly.
yeah, because we've got
So
amazing ability. I mean, look at science and engineering and technology. It's astonishing what these these glorified apes on the third rock from this yellow dwarf star, 2/3 out of the way of this barrel galaxy, in this cluster, in
Yeah.
this tendril, in this universe have done. Pretty
Yeah.
impressive. And
Yeah.
it's a shame that a lot of it's backfired and become mechanisms of oppression.
Yeah.
But we could turn it around. Rockets could deliver a payload that blows up a city and gives our boy Tyrone an erection. But
Right.
the same payload can take these humans to the moon, and it has. And it's the same guy whom he quotes at the beginning of Gravity's Rainbow. Nature does
And
not know death; it
yeah.
just knows rebirth. And
Yeah.
that's by Werner von Braun, of all people.
Yes. Yes. And again, so and then part of, and even as I'm giving words to maybe some of the maybe more hopeful dimensions of Pynchon, he's also, again, he's in this interplay. He um uh he simultaneously does have this hope, but also it gets canceled, and then it gets renewed, and then it gets canceled, and then um but yeah. Yeah.
Good
Good.
stuff. Well, it's got us cranking effortlessly for 2 hours about the dude that we love and that we nitpick over, but I think we both feel grace and gratitude that we've got a writer and an intellect and a talent that has embodied so much of our own aspirations for creative expression. Because
That's right.
ultimately we latch on to these creative heroes because we want to be like them. We want that similar power of expression and innovation. And we want to do some of the things that they've done, which is write a novel that blows people's minds and reveals some of the truths about human beings, society, where we are and where we can go. And that's
Definitely.
literature. That's literature,
And,
folks.
yeah. And maybe in our creating, we might understand how we've been formed and how we've been like the mystery of what it means to be a being and being created or formed or being just sprung up. Or, it's ambiguous in Pynchon, but there's a mystery to what creating itself unlocks when we're creating out of that open and honest place. Yeah.
Yes. And I think behind it all too is I got the feeling, especially after reading Against the Day, that he really believes in some kind of transcendence. And I think this is a great way to cap it because you're a theology student as well. I don't think Pynchon is a mechanistic, deterministic, fatalist atheist.
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't.
No, I don't. I don't either. No, I don't either.
I think this guy actually believes in some kind of spiritual underpinning to things, and I
Yeah.
think he arrived at that around the time he was, diving into the interminable and endless Against the Day, where
Yes.
he was in there and he was really believing it. And
Definitely.
and I think that that's profound in its own way. I don't think Thomas Pynchon is an atheist or even an agnostic. I think he really believes in other worlds and some kinds of angels and demons and maybe even some kind of transcendent, omniscient
Yeah.
presence. I really do. I think if he'd be listening to this, he'd be like nodding his head that, he might not understand really what it is, but I think through all of his contemplation and thinking and world building, he believes in God in some sense.
Yeah, definitely. I'm in agreement, and that's part of my quest is like to to consider what exactly, what is at work, and what is Pynchon seen, or what does he understand about things, and how does his literature deal with the transcendent? How does it how is it inhabit this there's this word used in the academic space. I'm not sure if it's made it to just whatever, but the post-secular, I don't know if that word's come across your radar, but it's this idea, there's this sense that it can't fully rest in some kind of secular completely secularized, atheistic kind of way of understanding, but it also can't rest in the like strong belief, like the classic traditional, any kind of traditional doctrinal understandings of reality. So there's this curious hybridized uh,
Yeah.
thing going on, but um, but what does seem to be the case is um, there's a there is a pull towards an openness to the transcendent and to whether it's to God or to something like that or gods or it's very indeterminate with Pynchon, but he does seem to be some kind of he has some kind of belief or something that undergirds his you know or a belief in some kind of sense of that undergirds his energies and his intellect and his playfulness and all that makes him so enlivening to read.
It could even be like Loki or the Egyptian god of
Right,
writing, Thoth, who is both an ibis bird and a baboon,
right,
which shows that inherent dichotomy and the playfulness. The court jester of the universe could be
right,
the one really in charge.
right.
And I think he might angle toward that in a way that's meaningful.
Yeah, I
And
think
look
that's
at the
it.
philosophy of science, quantum mechanics, the multi-worlds theory of Everett, the mathematical multiverse of Tegmark, Stephen Wolfram's Ruliad, the idea of a computational universe, but one
Yeah,
where its essence is completely different than how we perceive it from being. And you have quantum entanglement, this idea that even space and time might not be absolute,
right,
points to some kind of inspirational, mysterious backbone of reality itself that's connecting people, that's independent of space and time. And this could
yeah,
be wired within the framework of reality itself. So when you really start thinking about science in this speculative kind of way,
yeah,
uh, it points to that post-secular kind of sensibility that you've described, which is there's a limit to rationalism. There's a
yes,
limit to determinism. There's a limit to our cognitive understanding of analytically deconstructing and slicing and dicing the world. And opposite of that is this biocentric, emergent
mm,
creation of our own consciousness interacting with whatever the hell is out there to create what we experience and what we feel. And we don't know nothing. And what we see is an illusion, is a kind of simulation. And if even the essence of our own perception is this far removed from what absolute reality we know could or should be, then what the hell, man? Right? Believing in some kind of entity or God is not that much of a stretch at that point.
right, right. Oh, I love it, man. That's exactly yeah. That was such a great Pynchonian description of how even in the journey of human beings exercising their scientific capacity to see what's there, to study the natural world, we encounter mystery upon mystery, and we go from a Newtonian kind of framework or paradigm to now this quantum mechanical paradigm, and then all of uh, 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 the uh, the current cosmological
Right.
crisis cosmology now, and like it all ends up blooming when and I think that anyway, I think it's appropriate we're kind of con almost concluding on a note of the endless the questions that this fiction provokes, and that
The
it's
big ones, the big ones. And,
yeah,
if the universe is infinite or there's an infinite number of universes within some kind of infiniverse,
right,
then there's endless options and endless iterations. And you have Borges' Library of Babel, where every
Oh,
possible book is contained. And then you have the idea that every possible reality plays itself out. And that begs the question of free will. And it
yes,
spins amor fati, the Nietzschean idea, with its own eternal recurrence and determinism. And it's very Pynchon-esque because he grapples with these same issues throughout all of his books and does it in such a creative and clever way, superimposing the vicissitudes of historical circumstance to draw these out in ways that are always compelling and provocative and revealing. And that's our Pynchon, right? That's the guy we love.
definitely, definitely. Yep.
So thanks so much for your time, ladies and gentlemen. Matthew Nelson. He's the only guy I know who wrote a PhD thesis on our favorite writer, Thomas Ruggles Pynchon Jr.
Gotta get the junior in there. Yeah.
the man. So thanks so much for your time. I'd love to bring you back in maybe a few months or a little while. We could continue the conversation. We could dive into other aspects of it as we let our conversation germinate, because I got great insights from you on a lot of things I've never thought about regarding Pynchon and writing and everything that's cooking. And let's see how it shakes out. Tom is 88 and he's still wandering around the Upper West Side. There's an old Yiddish proverb that the more you complain, the longer God lets you live. So on that note, I hope Tom has it in him to crank out a few more novels with emasculated protagonists and tough women. And maybe he's got another encyclopedic bomb in the works. Who knows, right?
I like that hope. And yeah, no, thank you so much, Mookie, for having me on. This has been wonderful. I
Thank you
definitely
so much.
down to continue the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, like, comment, and share, everybody. This will be on YouTube, and there'll be clips, and I'll do the audio version, which will be on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and whatever. And share it with your Pynchon friends.
Definitely.
And I'm sure it's been too inside Pynchon for a lot of folks, but I know there are people out there who love the Thomas, and I think we covered some interesting, provocative, and evocative ground on this this major American writer who's actually still with us, and we hope for many years more. So take care, Matthew. Rock and roll.
Yeah. Thank you, Mookie. You too. You too. Have a good day.
Thank you.